Welcome back to another episode of Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson, and today we're excited to welcome Stacey Chazin, the founder and principal coach at iFactor Leadership. Stacey is a champion for introverted professionals, especially those in the finance and accounting sectors. In this episode, Stacey dismantles common myths about introverts, showcasing their strengths in presenting, leadership, and thriving in the workplace. We'll dive into her meeting playbook for introverts, tips for adapting to post-COVID work environments, and practical strategies for managing energy and extroverted design workplaces. Additionally, Stacey shares how the Myers-Briggs type indicator helped her embrace her introversion and the critical role of self-awareness in career success. Whether an introvert looking to thrive or a leader seeking to build an inclusive workplace, this episode is a must-listen. Join us as we uncover how to turn introversion into a powerful strength. Let's get started. Well, Stacey, thanks so much for coming on Count Me In. And today we're going to be talking about introverts because you're really passionate about helping introverts unlock their strengths, especially in leadership positions, because introverts can be leaders too. So what inspired you to focus on this kind of topic, this niche topic, particularly within the finance and accounting world? How can we help introverts? Because a lot of finance and accountants are focused on the numbers, focused on things, and not necessarily extroverts.
Yep, great question. So it might not surprise you. One of the core reasons I decided to focus on this space is because I am an introvert, and I had a number of experiences in my life that made me realize that I had made my introversion a limiting belief for myself. Messages, really, when I really thought about it, I realized messages that I probably heard since I was in preschool. Messages that you need to play with more kids, you need to stay in circle time the whole time, you need to it's better to be playing with all the kids on the playground rather than off on your own, or having more friends rather than fewer friends. And we hear messages like this as we're growing up, right? That it's better to be going out on Saturday nights when you're in high school more than sitting home with a good book or watching a movie, or to have a bigger circle of friends rather than a few close friends. And the messages continue as we go into professional spheres. We hear that, whether explicitly or implicitly, that to be a leader, you need to be outgoing, you need to be social, you need to be dynamic and willing to sit down and engage with folks and collaborate all the time. And first of all, that's not true. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But second of all, what it does to people like me who are introverted, it tells us that we're somehow less than. That the way we operate, which is based on the way we're wired, our preferences, how we're apt to show up as at our best, is somehow inferior to the way other people do it. And I heard that message through my childhood, in the early and mid stages of my career. And it really had a negative impact on what I thought I was capable of as a professional and as a leader, right? So it was this limiting belief that as an introvert, I couldn't lead, or I wasn't going to be inspiring or motivating, or be successful in many ways. And I had some experiences that started with completing a Myers-Briggs type indicator assessment, or MBTI, which for any of your listeners not familiar, MBTI, it's the world's most commonly used personality assessment, and it uncovers your preferences along a few different dimensions, one of which is how you get energy from the world. And those of us who tend to be fueled by the outside world are considered extroverted, or have a preference for extroversion. And those of us who are fueled more by being in small groups or being in our own thoughts and going deeply into things are considered to have a preference for introversion. And going through that process, I'm reading my own MBTI report. When I read that, I say it was like a window to my soul. I thought, like, this is how I'm wired. This is me. And it said to me, you have all these gifts, you have all these strengths. Stop pretending that they're inferior. Stop trying to act like the extroverts, because anytime we try to pretend to be something we're not, we're likely not going to succeed. And it really shifted how I viewed my professional trajectory and what I bring to the table. And once I started thinking about my introversion from a place of value rather than a place of deficit, it really shifted things for me. And I got bit by the leadership bug and decided to go back to school, get a master's in organizational development and leadership, and came out of that program really believing that leading from a place of self-awareness, including our introversion, that's the path to true success and true accomplishment and happiness. And I now work with other introverted professionals to help them see how they can get there to do the same thing.
it's crazy that in the process of of reflecting and understanding your introversion, you've gone to help others, which isn't a natural introverted thing to do in, like, if you look at stereotypical introversion activities.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's a great point. And what I would say is the caveat to that is one of the myths about introverts is that we don't like people, right? Completely false.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily like to talk to 20 people at once or to be engaging with people for several hours on end. But we do tend to like to have one-on-one conversations and to go more deeply with individuals. So working as a coach for other introverts in many ways is aligned with introversion.
Okay. I like that. So when you and I first spoke, you mentioned a number that really stuck out to me. You said that 75% of accountants are introverts. Why
Yeah.
do you think introversion is so prevalent in this field? And how does that impact the way accountants approach their work?
Great question. So I think, and this is based on my knowledge and expertise in introversion, not an expertise in the accounting field, but many of the tasks and roles that accountants are asked to play are aligned with the strengths of being an introvert.
Okay.
And I want to say, just as a caveat, that I'm talking in generalization. So not every introvert has these strengths. Introverts tend to, right, on the whole, they're going to tend to have a subset, or if not all of the traits I'm going to talk about, but it absolutely
Okay.
is going to vary by person. That being said, introverts tend to excel in preparation. We have a very strong attention to detail. We like to go deep in subject matter expertise in a project. So not just to skim the surface on different topics or work across 10 different projects or type of work, but to focus in one area. We tend to be very thoughtful.
Yeah.
And we like to work alone or in small groups. Many of these preferences are aligned with typical roles of finance or accounting professionals. And while I like to say, and I believe that as an introvert, you can pretty much do any job in the world, with the exception maybe of you probably don't want to be a front desk receptionist or working in a cashier role, anything where you're constantly engaging with the public. That might be a little too draining for introverts. But for the most part, we can do any job. However, we're likely to be drawn to the types of jobs that are going to let us use these strengths because we're going to see that we're going to be able to do our jobs better. We're going to feel more fulfilled by what we're doing, and we're going to have a bigger opportunity to let our strengths shine. People are going to see us for all the assets that we bring to the table.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned that you're going to speak in generalizations today. Maybe we can start by breaking down some of the stereotypes that surround introverts, so we can kind of say, hey, here's the stereotypes, but these aren't necessarily true.
I love that question. So first and foremost, at a high level, the myth that introverts can't be leaders. There's very much an extrovert ideal or an extrovert stereotype bias in the world, including in workplaces in particular, that you need to be extroverted to lead. However, introverts have a lot of key strengths that actually set us up to be very powerful and effective leaders. For example, introverts tend to be highly empathetic, highly emotionally intelligent. We're very good at forming relationships with people in ways that make them think that we care, see that we care, not just think that we care. We also tend to do very well, and this is a myth related to that. People think that introverts don't like to talk in front of big groups, that we don't like to present, when in fact, presenting and talking in front of a big group is very well aligned with being an introvert. And I will tell you why. Because typically, when you're in front of an audience, behind a podium or whatnot, one, you have the opportunity to prepare. No one's just throwing you up on the stage and saying, give a presentation on the impact of this policy in our field. So you have the opportunity to prepare, to practice, to go deep in your subject matter expertise. Introverts are also tend to be highly analytic. So we're very good at pulling together the data we need to build evidence for a point we're making or the proposition of our presentation. We're also tend to be very good storytellers. And that's because many introverts are voracious readers. So we've kind of have that narrative thing ingrained in us from all the reading that we've done. And lastly, this is my favorite one. When you're up on a stage presenting, you're in front of a big group, you don't have to make small talk, right? You're behind the podium. No one's coming up to you. You might have to answer some questions afterward, but you're kind of removed from the rest of the audience in your safe little introverted bubble up there. And so you can talk, you can put your expertise on full display, but you don't need to make that uncomfortable, for many of us, that uncomfortable small talk that makes us kind of want to run for the door sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Because when you're in a big group setting or when you're presenting like that, you don't have that. I never thought about it from that perspective of there is a large group of people, but you don't have to interact with all of them. You're just presenting something you've spent a lot of time preparing, as opposed to, being put on stage and say, here, talk 5 minutes about this subject. You're like,
right, exactly. So there's that. Another big myth is, well, let me tell you why the myth happens, then I'll tell you what the myth is. So often when we're in meetings and someone asks us a question or someone's looking for a big idea, it's the extroverts who are likely going to speak first, because extroverts do their processing out loud. They might not have thought something through thoroughly. They want to see how it sounds when it comes out of their mouth and see how other people respond to it. While introverts, we like to take our time. We like to process, to give things some thought. If it's a question we haven't expected, we might want to go look back at some data to see, all right, before I put my idea out there, what are the data saying about this problem or about the solution I'm proposing? And what happens is, all too often, people equate quickness of a response with intelligence and thought leadership. So when you see the people, you say, oh, well, he came up with the idea right away. Or she immediately knew what we should do. Now, these ideas may or may not be correct, but they're not necessarily going to be better than the ideas that an introvert's going to have when they come back to you a half hour later or the next day, or maybe have an opportunity to give you their idea in writing, which is where we tend to shine more than verbally in a lot of cases. So that leads to the myth that we're not strategic thinkers or we're not thought leaders to the extent that extroverted people are.
When I first got into the corporate environment, I always wondered why I had trouble speaking in meetings, because I would always come up with great ideas later, and I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that, hey, I might not have the first idea, but I had to learn how to process things in my own way and still be able to participate in those meetings. Maybe I'll add an idea at the end of the meeting as opposed to 2 days later.
And I'll share with you for the call notes, if you look, I have a link to, I created a meeting playbook for introverts. So
Okay.
ways to have your voice heard and your ideas shine in meetings. And it's available at ifactorgift.com. I'll send you that link.
Yeah.
It's a free guide, and it just has some ways talking about how you can prepare ahead of time, how you can show up at the meeting, and what you can do after the meeting. All different ways that you can set yourself up to create forums and environments where you do have that opportunity to have your thought leadership and your ideas heard.
For sure. And we'll put that link in the show notes for everybody listening, because I think that'll be really great to connect with that and have some new ideas for folks as they're trying to navigate these waters.
Great. Yeah. I think folks will really appreciate that. Thank you.
So one thing that, we're in having this conversation, I'm sure that the last 4 or 5 years since COVID-19 hit the world, and we had so many changes to our work-life balance and people working from home completely, and then maybe having to transition back to the office. I'm sure it's been a huge challenge for folks, especially if they got comfortable working from home, sitting late, relaxing in their bed, answering emails and taking calls from wherever, and then suddenly having to transition back to that office. What challenges do especially introverts face when they're shifting from working from home back to the office, and maybe hybrid situations? And it's really kind of jolting with all the challenges with everything that's happening.
Absolutely right. And for as tragic as COVID was, for many introverts, there was some comfort in not having to go into an office every day and to be able to just hunker down and do our work with less engagement. And certainly we've gotten used to Zoom, but it certainly requires us to be less energy draining. It still drains our energy, but it's a very different environment, right? You can turn your camera off if need be, or you can step away in different ways. But for introverts, so we had this shift back, right? I think, I don't know what the data say, but I think the majority of workplaces still are either fully remote or hybrid. I often find that it's the exception when I hear about companies that require their employees to be on site 5 days a week these days. So maybe you're in a hybrid environment. And I think to fully answer this question, I need to first say that most workplaces are designed with extroverts in mind. So when you think about open layout spaces where you have cubicles next to each other, even if they have some kind of walls or partitions up in between them, you've got demands to If you go to the ladies' room, if you go to the kitchen, you're running into people. Most companies, you'll have meetings that are scheduled back to back, not necessarily with any recognition that people need a little time in between to recharge. And there's a lot of pressure to network, even if it's with people you've already met, but to collaborate in person. So being in an on-site role can be a lot more draining for introverts. And so what I would say is there are practices that we've done at home when we've worked virtually that you can think about applying to your in-person work. So for example, you can't turn your camera off at work, but try to, if you can, take a 10-minute walk in between meetings. Block your calendar. See if possible for you to be able to say, all right, I'm going to need 2 30-minute breaks today where I just need to not be with people. And to the extent that you can, schedule those breaks. And whether that means taking a walk, if you can go outside, walking the halls of your company, plugging into a podcast at your desk, whatever that looks like. Another thing that you can do, and this applies to being at home or site, is to do task batching. And what that means is to group similar types of tasks together over the course of your day. So, and what that means is a type of task might be administrative work. You're completing your timesheets, you're preparing invoices, you're responding to emails that don't require a lot of thought. Another type of task might be something more creative or strategic, like writing a proposal or writing a report. For introverts, the process of when we switch between tasks that are very different, like administrative versus creative or strategic, it tends to drain our energy more than it does extroverts. So if you can group a particular type of tasks together, so you're not doing that task type switching throughout the day, you're going to be more likely to preserve your energy.
So what would you say to somebody who wears many hats on their role? And especially for people in financial leadership who are in small, medium-sized businesses, they wear many hats and they have to do a lot of those roles. What if you can't group all your meetings together? What if, you have this one to this one to this one and you don't have a choice? Are there some ways to kind of manage those, those things where it's outside of your control?
Yeah. So I think, well, what I'd first say is if as a rule, if more often than not you can do it, great. It doesn't have to be in all the time this is going to happen. If you start to set the expectation too with your team members that this is the time of day I'm doing these type of tasks.
Okay.
This is the time of day I'm doing the others. It's not going to be a fail safe, right? There are always going to be, or often there are going to be times when you're going to need to switch in the other direction. Then you need to do that. But I think if you're remote, I think one of the things you can do is you can turn your camera off for a meeting. I've read a lot of evidence that turning your camera off reduces that stress of connecting with other people and feeling like you're being looked at and scrutinized. So that can help you to alleviate some of that stress. If it's a meeting where you don't have to be taking notes, could you do the meeting while you're taking a walk outside? That could be a way to just the movement of your body can help to instill some calmness and make it a little less stressful for you.
Yeah. Or even get one of those desks that you can, that you have like a treadmill underneath. You can walk while you're in the meeting.
Yep. I have one of those. I have one of those pedals a little bike that goes under my desk. I probably only used it twice, but I have it and I could use it if I want to. But yeah, anything that can help to fuel and protect your mind and that mind-body connection and keep you reinvigorated is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, one thing our team started was, in Outlook you can set your default time instead of at 30 minutes or 60 minutes, you can set it to 25 or 50 minutes. And so we started scheduling our meetings so default there's a 5-minute break after a meeting. And so if you stay on task and end your meeting on time, you've given everybody a 5-minute break before whatever their next task is. And I think being kind to each other in that way and saying, hey guys, let's be mindful of each other's time. This may be a great topic. And if we're going to go over, we say, hey, everybody, we're about to go over. Does anybody need to go? And I think we need to be more cognizant of how people are feeling and the breaks that people need. Because if everybody is back to back to back, you barely have time to breathe.
Yeah. And for many extroverts, that's fine. But I would argue that as a rule, it's not so great, right? You want to have time to to get your thoughts together, to get your head in the space so that you're able to contribute to the next call productively and in a way that is going to show your best thinking, your best creativity, heightened focus, etc.
Yeah. So let's say an introvert's listening to this and they're like, well, my goal is to be a leader in my organization and, whatever capacity that is. Are there some strategies? Because, you've already mentioned that, typical leadership that everybody thinks about is geared toward an extrovert. Are there some strategies or some ways to effectively present themselves as a good leadership candidate, even though that the extroverted person might be the star pupil or whatever? How can they kind of say, hey, I want to stand out in this moment?
Yeah, excellent question. And I talk about this in terms of building your personal brand as a leader.
Yeah.
When you're introverted. And all the strategies I teach and that I guide my coaching clients with are all rooted in the notion of what's called your positive core. And your positive core, it's an idea from a coaching framework called appreciative coaching that I use. And the idea is, instead of focusing on what your deficits are, what you need to fix, I need to be a better writer, I need to be a better team player, a better whatever, to focus on what is it that you're really good at? What are your strengths? And how can you bring those strengths to the table? And how can you use those to show, how do you put your strengths to work, but how can you use your strengths to showcase your work?
Okay.
And so with that in mind, when we're thinking about how do you build your personal brand as a leader when you are introverted, we think about things like introverts tend to be, like we've talked about, very thoughtful. They have deep subject matter expertise. They tend to be good writers. So one thing you might want to do is look for introvert-friendly ways to showcase your thought leadership. That could be curating a blog. It could be contributing posts to someone else's blog. It could be writing a memo with strategic recommendations for some problem you're solving. We tend to do very well in one-on-one interactions. So it could be scheduling a quarterly check-in with your manager, where you talk about what your goals are and being really clear on what you need to do, what she needs to see from you in order for you to progress and meet those goals. So tapping into that one-on-one, that thoughtful preparation, that, really good with a pen. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing is to have conversations and engagements with people that are in smaller groups or one-on-one. So maybe you make a goal that once a month or once every 2 weeks, you want to have lunch or coffee with a colleague, where you want to be able to, you set some goal for the meeting where you want to be communicating that you really are a strategic thinker, or you're very good at problem solving. And it's not like, hey, John, I want to tell you how good I am at solving problems, but you're talking about things that you've done that demonstrate that prowess.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing to do. It's not, you're not going to be the one sitting around the conference table touting your accomplishments. That's just not you. The other thing I recommend is really creating a portfolio over the course of the year of different contributions that you've made, how you've the work that you've done, what you've achieved, and even more importantly, how what you achieved contributed to the team's goals or the organization's goals. Keep a file in your email, create a new folder that's, examples of how I'm great or great feedback I've received. And anytime someone sends you an email that acknowledges a contribution you've made or acknowledges a strength that you have, put it in there. So that come the end of the year, when you're sitting down at performance review time, or you're making an ask for a promotion, a raise, flexible work arrangement, whatever, you have all this stuff handy and you're not trying to throw it all together at the last minute. And these are ways that you can build your brand, and you can begin to, over time, really guide and form what people think of when they hear your name, the type of leader you are, the type of contributor and professional that you are.
Yeah, it's a slow burn. It's not instant gratification, but it's something that you have to build over time. When you're building trust, when you're building yourself up and you're learning about yourself, that takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. So I like that approach that you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, there's something that we hear a lot now, especially with the way things are changing and how busy organizations are. Organizations are tightening the belt and, reducing staff. Burnout is a real thing for introverts and extroverts, regardless of how you interact with folks. It's a real thing. How can professionals kind of manage their energy, maintain a healthy balance without compromising the growth of their career? Because, you can't always say, I need a 2-month break. Just give me time. Like, that's not an option these days.
I want that job.
Yeah, I want that job too.
Yeah. And burnout is such a real thing. And I will tell you, I recently launched, I believe this episode's coming out toward the start of the year. I'm going to be opening up for the second time doors to a course I just created online called the Introverts Leadership Formula. And one of the modules focuses entirely on burnout prevention for introverts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I teach how do you recognize the signs and symptoms of burnout. And one of the things that I teach, and I'll expand on a little bit here, is how do you say no as an introvert? That's a really hard thing. And the introverts who my coaching clients, I hear that so often. They don't know how to set boundaries and then stick to them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways anyone can get burnt out, right? If you have too much on your plate, or people are giving you work that isn't aligned with your skill set or what's going to be feasible for you to accomplish, it's a surefire way to burn you out. And that's going to can lead to physical, emotional, psychological, symptoms that are just not healthy for you. So we have a hard time saying no. Like, we tend to be conflict averse. We tend to want harmony in the workplace and harmony with others. And we also tend to not want to disappoint people. So what saying no is, it's generally going to disappoint someone. And we like to be seen as someone that others can count on.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is if someone puts you on the spot with an ask that's not aligned with your availability, your bandwidth, or your skill set, buy yourself some time. Say, let me check with what else I have going on and let me get back to you. Or I need to review my current commitments. And then, so I want to make sure if I'm saying yes to you, that I can do the job the way you need it to get done, with the degree of excellence that I know that you and I would both expect from it. Once you do that, if you can do that, there's a technique called, using the yes and technique. So yes, I'm happy to take it on, and I would need to start it next month. And I would need to have support from some other staffers to be able to do this in a way that's going to meet the expectations and to do it well. And then the third way to do it is to offer alternatives. So I'm not able to do it right now, but I believe that Sarah's available, and she actually has a lot of experience in this space. Again, a caveat, you won't always be able to say these things depending on the power dynamic. The flexibility you're going to have to say no, it could not be there at times. But these are things you should aspire to, and communicate with the other person that if you were to say yes to this would be the impact, right? That you might not be able to do it to meet the standards of excellence. Your other work might suffer, and I would absolutely encourage saying that your well-being in the workplace might suffer because you're going to have too much on your plate. So set the boundaries and do your best to stick to them.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But I like that approach that approach that's famous in improv, yes and. But I like that approach for saying, yes, I can do it, or yes, I can do it and I can start it this time. But it's more than just saying no and just leaving it at that. I think you have to have that good communication, that open communication, to be open and saying, hey, this is where I'm at, as opposed to just flat out saying no or flat out saying yes and not taking into consideration any aspects of it.
Yeah. And this really just connects to how crucial it is to communicate with your manager and your colleagues about your bandwidth, about your abilities, and even the fact that you're introverted. You might not want to use that word, that's up to you, but it's so important to let your manager and your coworkers know how you can do your best work, what it is that you need to be successful. And one of the things I suggest when a team comes together for the first time, whether it's an ad hoc project team or a newly forming team that's going to stick around for a long time, is at your first meeting to go around the table and have everyone share one thing with the group. What do you want the rest of the group to know about what you need to be successful on this team? Right. And for an introvert, that could be, I need a balance of group and individual work time so that I'll be able to do my best. Or I need opportunities to contribute my ideas in writing, because that's when you're going to get the most thoughtful, data-based, innovative ideas from me rather than on the spot. And everyone will go around the table. You'll learn a lot of things about each other. It probably won't be all introverts. I hope it wouldn't be all introverts. It gives you an opportunity to share with your team members what you need to be at your best. And when they hear that from you, there's a much greater likelihood they're gonna give that to you. If they don't know, they can't do it.
Yeah. Well, and it's also a call to all leaders out there who are listening to this to saying, hey, be mindful of your teams and give that open space so that people can share, hey, this doesn't work best for me. Can we try this? And working with each other as opposed to just saying everybody has to do it one way.
That's exactly right. Because this conversation is more than just about what can you do as an introvert to thrive, but how can managers get the most out of their introverted employees and make sure that not just what can they get out of them, but how can they make sure they're the happiest and they're fulfilled and they're doing their best work. And so giving your employees, your team members opportunities to contribute in different ways, to work in different ways that reflect their strengths. Super important.
Well, Stacey, I hope our listeners have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate you sharing and coming on and sharing everything with our audience today.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.